Tell me why you're doing this. Seriously.
I am awake.
One of the greatest burdens a person can carry is wasting their potential. However, when the person carrying this burden finds themselves in certain circumstances, they have no choice but to change. The Breaking Bad series essentially tells the story of this inevitable transformation. The series focuses on the dramatic transformation Walter White undergoes in the final years of his life, despite his genius-level intelligence and great potential in chemistry, while working as a high school chemistry teacher. With this transformation, the quiet and reserved Walter quickly becomes a feared and respected drug lord. How can an innocent man possess such potential for evil? Is it merely desperation that drives him, or are there deeper motivations at play? To answer these questions, we must first get to know Walter White more closely. Walter White is a quiet and introverted man who leads a monotonous life. Despite being a teacher, he struggles to make ends meet and works at a car wash in his spare time. Although he once made significant contributions to scientific research, the fact that life has confined him to poverty and mediocrity causes him to feel a deep sense of worthlessness. His life continues this way for a long time, until one day he receives unexpected news. He has lung cancer. Concerned about his family's future, Walter begins producing drugs with his student, Jesse Pinkman, in order to leave them a substantial amount of money. However, it soon becomes clear that his intentions are different. Even after earning enough money, Walter does not stop, because it is not just about money. And we realize that we do not really know him well. Still, the real catalyst for this internal transformation is not just external circumstances or anger toward the past. The cancer diagnosis and the reality of impending death become the breaking point that brings all these suppressed emotions to the surface. As German philosopher Martin Heidegger pointed out, humans can only exhibit authentic existence when they become aware of their mortality. Facing death breaks humans out of their ordinary lives, makes them question the meaning of their existence, and radically changes their lives. This is because humans often live without questioning. They act according to society's expectations and try to get through each day. But when confronted with death, they realize that their life is limited. This realization shakes them and prompts the question, am I really living the way I want to? At this point, humans stop procrastinating and want to truly live. Therefore, the reality of death leads humans to make radical decisions. Walter White is one of the most striking examples of this existential awareness. With his cancer diagnosis, Walter, who feels that his life is limited, wants to go beyond an ordinary life and leave a lasting mark. He has nothing left to lose, so he takes bold action and begins to freely use his talent in chemistry for the first time. At the same time, Walter White accepts death as a part of nature and approaches it with unusual composure. He does not become bitter or withdrawn. On the contrary, he becomes more active than ever before. He is freed from his fears and begins to feel more alive. Walter, who has been guided by others throughout his life, wants to take complete control, at least in his final days. This determination is connected to an important choice he made in the past. In his youth, Walter founded a research and technology company called Gray Matter with a group of friends. However, after a while, he sold his shares at a price so low it was almost negligible for personal reasons. Over the years, Gray Matter grows to be worth billions of dollars. This situation causes Walter to feel deep regret and growing disappointment. As a result of this regret, his pride is hurt, and the feeling of worthlessness that he had suppressed over time grows. From that point on, he retreats into his comfort zone, settling into an ordinary life as an average chemistry teacher. However, the grandeur of the life he could have had never leaves his mind. This burden of the past transforms into a deep sense of dissatisfaction and anger within Walter over the years. Ultimately, this dissatisfaction merged with his desire to regain his lost reputation and his need to prove his intelligence. Behind his entry into the criminal world were not only material concerns, but also a suppressed ambition, a shattered ego, and an inner rebellion fueled by unfulfilled potential. This internal rebellion also affects Walter's moral compass. Walter, who tries to justify his crimes by saying that he is doing them for his family, gradually rationalizes his actions in his own favor. He bends social rules and ethical values, even reinterpreting them in order to overcome the obstacles in front of him. For him, the line between good and evil is shaped by consequences and his own interests. Walter views social norms as relative truths. He argues that laws and rules change over time and adapt to circumstances. Therefore, he does not believe in universal morality. He rationalizes his crimes and creates justifications to silence his conscience. The people he kills or harms are either obstacles or inevitable victims in his eyes. Thus, crime becomes a necessary and logical strategy for him. As he rises in the criminal world, he makes more ruthless decisions. Leaving his old life behind, he becomes a legend on the streets under the name Heisenberg. This transformation is a form of existence that transcends traditional morality and boundaries, creating its own values. It is precisely here that Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, or superhuman, comes into play. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch refers to the process of transcending oneself and creating one's own values. According to Nietzsche, humans must abandon living with ready-made values and determine their own morality and form of existence. The Übermensch breaks down the boundaries of ordinary humans and shapes life in their own favor through power and will. He moves forward despite fear and does not shy away from pain. On the contrary, he sees pain as part of his development. The difficulties he experiences fuel his transformation and enable him to transcend himself. Nietzsche's concept of the will to power is important here. The Übermensch seeks to transform life rather than submit to it. This idea is a profound challenge to the classical understanding of morality. A similar transformation takes place in Walter White's story. Initially a helpless, ordinary man, he gradually pushes his own limits and becomes a figure who sets his own rules. With his Heisenberg identity, he breaks old moral patterns and creates his own values. As he rises in the criminal world, his suppressed dark side emerges. His ego grows, and his narcissistic tendencies become more pronounced. After a while, he turns into an arrogant and ruthless bully. He manipulates those around him and does not hesitate to put them at risk for his own goals. He no longer lives in the shadow of his failed past. He has overcome his fears and left his timidity behind. He does not back down, even at the cost of losing his humanity. He unleashes his suppressed ego and becomes a selfish man who sacrifices many things without hesitation for his desires. However, there is an important difference here. Nietzsche's Übermensch destroys social values while creating new values for humanity. Walter, on the other hand, is stuck in the past, acting on suppressed desires and broken pride. He feeds on chaos, succumbing to his instincts and ego, and takes a tragic path. Therefore, he does not fully fit Nietzsche's definition of the superhuman. In the end, his family hates him, and he has no one left who loves him. He has tragically lost everything he had. Nevertheless, Walter does not feel remorse for what he has done. In the final days of his life, he has done what he loves. He finds this path more meaningful than what he has lost. What matters to him is not what others think, but being at peace with his inner voice. This brings him inner peace and satisfaction, even if it leads him to moral ruin, despite everything that has happened. As seen in the example of Walter White, good and evil are often shaped more by the influence of one's environment than by one's inner world. In philosophy, this idea is called social determinism. In other words, what determines who a person will be is largely environmental factors. Sometimes, feelings of exclusion, worthlessness, or inequality of opportunity can weaken or completely transform a person's moral compass. However, this does not mean that individual responsibility is completely disregarded. Two people raised under the same conditions may choose different paths. One may stray into darkness, while the other remains in the light. Social determinism is explanatory in most cases, but it is not absolute. Choice is always a possibility, and some people, far beyond external influences, choose good or evil with their own will. Therefore, the idea of Walter White's transformation from good to evil is flawed. Walter was never a good person. He was just cowardly and harmless. When opportunity knocked, his suppressed dark side began to emerge. This was not so much a transformation as the gradual revelation of a masked character. And perhaps that is why Walter's story is so compelling, because sometimes, to understand someone, you have to look not at what they say, but at what they do when opportunity knocks.
You want your money, right? Huh? You wanna know where it is? You pull that trigger, you never...